The music teacher made Elvis stand in front of class while she explained why he'd never make it. What Elvis did next became legendary. It was a Tuesday morning in October 1949 at Humes High School in Memphis, Tennessee. 14-year-old Elvis Presley sat in the back row of Mrs. Catherine Gilmore's music class, trying to make himself invisible. He'd learned that sitting in the back, staying quiet, and avoiding eye contact, that was the best way to get through school when you were the poor kid with the weird clothes and the slicked back hair that everyone made fun of. Mrs. Gilmore had been teaching music at Humes for 18 years, and she ran her classroom like a military operation. She believed in classical music, proper technique, and traditional standards. She had no patience for students who couldn't read sheet music, who sang with improper style, or who thought they could just feel their way through music without understanding theory. And she especially had no patience for Elvis Presley. Elvis had made the mistake of raising his hand a few weeks earlier when Mrs. Gilmore asked if anyone in class played an instrument. He'd mentioned that he played guitar and sang a little. Mrs. Gilmore had immediately marked him as someone who needed to be taken down a peg. In her experience, boys who played guitar were usually trying to impress girls and had no real musical talent. Mr. Presley, Mrs. Gilmore's sharp voice cut through the classroom that Tuesday morning. "I'd like you to come to the front of the class, please." Elvis's stomach dropped. He hadn't done anything wrong that he knew of. He'd been sitting quietly, not bothering anyone. But when Mrs. Gilmore used that tone, you didn't argue. Elvis stood up, his face already burning with embarrassment as 30 pairs of eyes turned to watch him. He walked to the front of the classroom, his worn-out shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. The other kids were already snickering. Being singled out by Mrs. Gilmore was never good. "Class," Mrs. Gilmore said, standing next to Elvis with her arms crossed. "I want to use Mr. Presley here as an example of something we've been discussing. The difference between genuine musical talent and enthusiasm." Elvis felt his face get hotter. He stared at the floor, wishing it would open up and swallow him. "Mr. Presley informed me earlier this semester that he plays guitar and sings," Mrs. Gilmore continued. "So, I asked him to bring his guitar to class today and demonstrate for us." Elvis's head snapped up. He hadn't brought his guitar. He didn't even own a guitar anymore. His family had to pawn it last month to pay the electric bill. But before he could explain, Mrs. Gilmore was already talking again. "Oh, you forgot it. How convenient." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Well, perhaps you can sing for us instead. After all, you told me you've been performing at local venues. Surely you can sing without accompaniment." Elvis wanted to disappear. He wanted to run out of that classroom and never come back. But 30 kids were staring at him, waiting. Mrs. Gilmore was staring at him with that look that said she already knew he was going to fail. "I don't know what to sing, Elvis mumbled. "Anything you'd like, Mr. Presley. Whatever you think showcases your talent." The way she said talent made it clear she thought he had none. Elvis could hear kids giggling. His hands were shaking. His throat felt tight. But he'd been singing his whole life. He could do this. He had to do this. Elvis closed his eyes and started singing Old Shep, the song his mama loved. His voice came out shaky at first, nervous and uncertain. But then something happened that always happened when Elvis sang. He forgot where he was. He forgot the classroom, forgot Mrs. Gilmore, forgot everything except the music. His voice found its natural style, that blend of country and blues, that emotional intensity that made the song feel real instead of just pretty. He put his whole heart into it, singing about loss and love and grief. When Elvis finished, the classroom was completely silent. For a moment, he thought maybe he'd done well. Maybe Mrs. Gilmore would finally see that he wasn't just some poor kid pretending to have talent. Then Mrs. Gilmore started clapping slowly, sarcastically. A few students nervously joined in. "Thank you, Mr. Presley, for that interesting demonstration," she said. "Class, I want you to pay attention now because Mr. Presley has just shown us several critical mistakes that aspiring singers make." Elvis stood there frozen as Mrs. Gilmore walked around him like he was a specimen under examination. First, notice the lack of proper vocal technique, no breath support, no attention to pitch accuracy. Second, observe the excessive emotional display. In professional music, we control our emotions. We don't let them control us. Third, and perhaps most importantly, notice the stylistic confusion. Is this country? Is this blues? Mr. Presley seems unable to commit to a single genre, which shows a fundamental lack of understanding about music. Each word felt like a slap. Elvis kept his eyes on the floor, blinking back tears. Mr. Presley, Mrs. Gilmore said, standing directly in front of him. Now, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. I've been teaching music for 18 years. I've seen hundreds of students come through these doors. Some have genuine talent. Most don't. You unfortunately fall into the second category. Elvis finally looked up at her and she met his eyes with absolute certainty. You have enthusiasm. I'll grant you that. But enthusiasm isn't talent. Playing guitar at local venues for tips isn't a career. It's a hobby at best, a delusion at worst. Your voice is untrained. Your style is confused and your understanding of music theory is non-existent. The classroom was dead silent now. Even the kids who usually laughed at everything seemed uncomfortable with how brutal this was getting. My advice to you, Mrs. Gilmore continued, is to give up on this music fantasy now before you waste years of your life chasing something you'll never achieve. You will never be a professional singer. You don't have what it takes. The sooner you accept that, the better off you'll be. She turned back to the class. Mr. Presley has done us a service today by demonstrating what not to do. He's shown us that raw emotion without technical skill is just noise. That mixing genres without understanding them is just confusion. And that confidence without competence is just arrogance. Mrs. Gilmore looked back at Elvis. You may sit down now, Mr. Presley. And please stop wasting everyone's time with these musical pretensions. Elvis walked back to his desk, feeling like he'd been physically beaten. The other students wouldn't look at him. Nobody said a word. He sat down and stared at his desk for the rest of class, not hearing anything Mrs. Gilmore said, just replaying her words over and over in his head. You will never be a professional singer. You don't have what it takes. After class, Elvis didn't go to his next period. He walked out of school, got on the city bus, and rode all the way home to Lauderdale Courts. He went straight to the apartment, not caring that he'd get in trouble for cutting school. His mama was home doing laundry in the kitchen. She took one look at Elvis's face and dropped the shirt she was folding. Baby, what happened? Why aren't you in school? Elvis tried to hold it together, tried to be tough, but the moment his mama asked, everything came pouring out. He told her about Mrs. Gilmore, about being made to sing in front of the class, about being told he'd never make it, about being used as an example of what not to do. Gladys listened to the whole story, her face getting harder and angrier with each word. When Elvis finished, she grabbed her coat. Come on, she said. We're going back to that school. Mama, no. Elvis Aaron Presley, no teacher is going to talk to my son that way. Not on my watch. They took the bus back to Humes High School. Gladys marched straight to the principal's office with Elvis trailing behind, embarrassed, but also secretly glad his mama was fighting for him. The principal, Mr. Robert Cole, listened to Gladys's furious account of what happened in Mrs. Gilmore's class. He promised to speak with Mrs. Gilmore about her teaching methods, but he also gently suggested that perhaps Elvis was being overly sensitive, that constructive criticism was part of education. That wasn't constructive criticism, Gladys said, her voice shaking with anger. That was humiliation. That was a teacher using her position to crush a child's dreams in front of his peers. And I won't stand for it. Walking home from the bus stop, Gladys put her arm around Elvis. Baby, I want you to listen to me real careful. That woman don't know what she's talking about. Mama, she's been teaching music for 18 years. She knows more than she knows how to teach kids to sing like robots, Gladys interrupted. She knows how to make them follow rules and fit into boxes. But you know what she don't know. She don't know that the best music in the world comes from people who don't fit in boxes. She don't know that feeling is more important than technique. And she sure as hell don't know my son. Elvis wanted to believe her, but Mrs. Gilmore's words were still echoing in his head. You will never be a professional singer. You know what you're going to do. Gladys said. You're going to prove her wrong. Every time you sing, every time you perform, every time someone tells you you're good, you're going to remember what that bitter old woman said, and you're going to use it as fuel. That night, Elvis couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about standing in front of that class, about the laughter, about Mrs. Gilmore's certainty that he would fail. But he also thought about his mama's words, about using it as fuel. The next day at school, Elvis walked past Mrs. Gilmore in the hallway. She didn't acknowledge him, didn't even look at him. He was just another failed student to her, already forgotten. But Elvis looked at her and he made a silent promise to himself. One day he would make her remember him. One day she would know his name. Elvis started performing more after that. Every local venue that would have him, every radio amateur contest, every talent show, he sang with more intensity, more passion, more determination. And every time someone told him he was good, every time someone requested a song, every time someone threw money in his guitar case, Elvis thought about Mrs. Gilmore and thought, "See, you were wrong." In 1954, when That's All Right started playing on Memphis radio, one of the first things Elvis thought about was Mrs. Gilmore. He wondered if she'd heard it. He wondered if she recognized his voice. He wondered if she remembered the kid she'd humiliated in front of his class. By 1955, Elvis was playing sold-out shows across the South. By 1956, he was the biggest star in America. And by 1957, Elvis Presley was a household name around the world. In March 1957, Elvis returned to Memphis for a charity concert. The local newspaper ran a big story about their hometown hero, mentioning that he'd graduated from Humes High School. The article quoted several of his former teachers, all claiming to have recognized his talent early on. Catherine Gilmore was not among those quoted, but she read the article in her kitchen, staring at a photo of Elvis on stage in front of thousands of screaming fans, and she felt something she'd never felt before. The sickening realization that she'd been completely wrong. A few weeks later, Mrs. Gilmore did something she'd never done before. She wrote Elvis a letter. She sent it to his management company, not really expecting it to reach him. In the letter, she apologized. She explained that she'd been teaching the same way for so long that she couldn't recognize talent that didn't fit her narrow definition. She said that watching him succeed had taught her more about music than 18 years of teaching ever had. She asked if he could ever forgive her for what she'd said that day in class. Elvis received the letter while on tour. His manager assumed he'd throw it away. Instead, Elvis read it 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in his wallet. When Elvis returned to Memphis a month later, he did something unexpected. He went back to Humes High School and asked to speak with Mrs. Gilmore. She agreed, terrified about what he might say. They met in the same classroom where she'd humiliated him 8 years earlier. Mrs. Gilmore, now looking older and smaller than Elvis remembered, sat at her desk. Elvis stood in front of her, the same spot where he'd stood as a terrified 14-year-old. "Mrs. Gilmore," Elvis said, "I got your letter." "Mr. Presley, I'm so deeply sorry. Please let me finish," Elvis said gently. "I wanted to thank you." Mrs. Gilmore looked shocked. "Thank me?" "Yes, What you did that day, it hurt. It hurt bad. I went home thinking maybe you were right. Maybe I should give up. But then I realized something. You gave me a choice. I could believe you or I could prove you wrong. And choosing to prove you wrong made me work harder than I ever would have otherwise." Elvis smiled. "Every time I wanted to quit, every time someone rejected me, I thought about you telling me I'd never make it. And I thought, watch me." Mrs. Gilmore had tears in her eyes. "I was wrong about you, about everything." "You weren't all wrong," Elvis said. "I didn't have technical training. I was mixing genres in ways that made no sense. I was singing with too much emotion and not enough control. All of that was true. You just didn't understand that those things weren't flaws. They were what made me different." He sat down in one of the student desks looking around the classroom. "You know what I learned from that day? I learned that the people who tell you you can't do something are usually people who don't understand what you're trying to do. They're not evil. They're just limited by their own understanding." Mrs. Gilmore nodded, wiping her eyes. "I've changed how I teach because of you. I tell my students now that there are many ways to make music, not just the way I was taught. You changed me, Mr. Presley." Elvis stood up to leave, then turned back. "Mrs. Gilmore, you want to know the honest truth? That day in class was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Not because you were right. You weren't, but because it taught me that I could either let other people's opinions define me or I could define myself. I chose to define myself." "I'm glad you did," Mrs. Gilmore said softly. "Me, too," Elvis replied. "Me, too." The story of Mrs. Gilmore and Elvis became famous in Memphis teaching circles. She told it to every new class of music students as a cautionary tale about the danger of being too rigid in your definitions of talent. "I once had a student who didn't fit any of my categories," she would say. "He mixed genres I thought should never be mixed. He sang with emotion I thought was excessive. He had a style I thought was wrong. His name was Elvis Presley, and he taught me that the best artists are the ones who break all the rules I thought mattered." Catherine Gilmore taught for another 12 years after meeting with Elvis. She changed her teaching style completely, encouraging students to find their own voices rather than forcing them into traditional molds. She never forgot the lesson that Elvis taught her, that sometimes the students we think will fail are actually the ones changing the world. Elvis kept Mrs. Gilmore's apology letter in his wallet until he died. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even the people who hurt us can learn and grow, and that forgiveness is more powerful than revenge. The music teacher made Elvis stand in front of class and told him he'd never make it. What Elvis did next wasn't just prove her wrong. It was show her how to be a better teacher. And that might be the most legendary thing of all. If this story of humiliation turned into triumph inspired you, make sure to subscribe and share this video. Let us know in the comments if a teacher ever told you that you wouldn't succeed. Sometimes the best response to someone who doubts you isn't anger. It's grace, success, and the wisdom to help them understand what they missed.